At 3:12 a.m., the heavy silence of the Strait of Hormuz was broken by a red alert that exploded in the combat center of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer patrolling the most dangerous maritime blockade on the planet. The SPY-6 radar picked up dozens of signatures appearing simultaneously on the horizon, advancing at extreme speed from multiple directions like predators converging on isolated prey. Tension inside the American vessel increased in seconds as operators realized this was no simple intimidation exercise. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had just launched a large-scale coordinated offensive. In less than 90 seconds, dozens of fast boats armed with rockets would be within firing range. The dark sea seemed to breathe war. Each wave reflected the red light of the emergency panels as American sailors raced between combat stations, trying to process the avalanche of information unfolding before them. The world stage had plunged into chaos after the complete collapse of diplomatic channels between Washington and Tehran. The maximum pressure campaign conducted by the United States pushed the Iranian regime into a state of absolute survival. With no room to retreat, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched Operation Guardian of Hormuz, a desperate attempt to seize total control of the maritime bottleneck responsible for the planet's energy flow. Iran was no longer making vague threats. Now it openly declared that any Western oil tanker crossing those waters would be treated as a military target. The strait ceased to be a commercial route and became a death corridor. At 3:20 a.m., at the center of that storm was an Arleigh Burke Flight 3 destroyer, a war machine valued at billions of dollars, built to dominate modern seas. Its electronic systems were operating at maximum capacity as the ship advanced under a moonless sky. Above the clouds, invisible to those observing from the surface, a Boeing P-8A Poseidon flew overhead. The Maritime Patrol aircraft functioned as the brains of the American operation. Every sensor, every antenna, and every camera was connected to a gigantic C-4ISR combat network that mapped the battlefield in real time. The Poseidon detected mobile missile launchers, leaving hidden positions near the Iranian coast. At the same time, a fleet of speedboats emerged from coastal caves and small makeshift ports to form a reconnaissance ring around the strait. Immediately, an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter was launched from the destroyer's deck. The propellers cut through the dawn air as the aircraft disappeared over the dark waters, carrying anti-submarine warfare equipment and sensors specialized in hunting sea mines. The pilot knew that any mistake that night would mean a devastating explosion beneath the hull of an American ship. At 3:30 a.m., the combat entered an invisible dimension. The P-8A Poseidon switched from passive surveillance mode to direct offensive coordination. The crew began deploying a network of radio buoys recalibrated specifically to detect the acoustic signatures of Iranian speedboat engines amidst the violent waves of the strait. Within minutes, an extremely precise digital map emerged showing the movement of Iranian forces in real time. Each bright spot represented a deadly threat advancing through the sea. All data was instantly encrypted and transmitted via the Link 16 system to the American fleet. At 3:35 a.m., thanks to this information, the MH-60R Seahawk executed the first attack of the battle. Flying on the edge of the combat zone, beyond the range of Iranian machine guns, the crew locked onto a command vessel using the MTS electro-optical system. 2 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles were launched almost simultaneously. Streaks of fire cut through the darkness before a gigantic explosion illuminated the sea. The Iranian vessel was destroyed in a ball of flames and shrapnel. The impact shook the entire Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Without its command unit, dozens of smaller boats began to lose coordination, scattering amidst the chaos of the early morning. But the Iranian response came immediately. At 3:40 a.m., the Revolutionary Guard launched a massive asymmetric counterattack. Hundreds of Ababil drones were launched from coastal caves hidden in the mountains. Within seconds, American radars were flooded with false signals and multiple targets. The initial 50 contacts turned into hundreds of points flashing simultaneously on the Aegis system screens. The destroyer faced an electronic nightmare. Operators desperately tried to distinguish real drones from metallic decoys and digital interference produced by Iranian transmitters scattered along the coast. At the same time, in the meantime, rocket launchers hidden among cliffs unleashed a devastating barrage. The rockets did not directly target the American ship. Instead, they fell into the water surrounding the destroyer, creating gigantic columns of salt water and steam. An artificial curtain rose around the American vessel, blinding infrared sensors and laser targeting systems. The ship was now navigating practically within a storm created by the enemy. The American crew was forced to operate in an environment where physical warfare and electronic warfare merged into a single field of destruction. At 3:47 a.m., the battle reached a new stage. Iranian coastal units began locking their radars directly onto the American fleet. The destroyer Arleigh Burke responded immediately. Using coordinates transmitted by the P-8A Poseidon, the Mark 41 vertical launch system opened fire. Precision-guided missiles left the deck in brutal sequence, illuminating the night sky as they accelerated toward enemy positions. Moments later, violent explosions destroyed Iranian coastal launchers before they could even fire their anti-ship missiles. Simultaneously, the SLQ-32 electronic warfare system launched a powerful jamming attack against Revolutionary Guard radars. Beams of energy saturated enemy receivers, creating a huge blind spot along the coast. For the first time that morning, the Americans opened a small window of advantage. At 3:50 a.m., with the main air bases occupied on long-range interception missions, an unexpected resource was activated. Two A-10C Thunderbolt IIs sped off to reinforce the combat. Many considered those planes relics of the Cold War, but that night, they were the perfect choice. Unlike supersonic fighters, the A-10 could fly slowly and remain over the combat area for long periods. Its pilots had trained specifically to destroy swarms of fast-moving vessels in extreme maritime scenarios. Equipped with advanced sniper vision systems and night vision sensors, the so-called sky boars became ideal predators for hunting small vessels hidden among the waves. At 3:55 a.m., the two A-10s suddenly appeared among the coastal mountains. To avoid detection by Iranian radar, the pilots flew close to the limestone cliffs, using the terrain as natural cover. When they finally appeared over the sea, they were only 30 meters above the ground. Their wings practically cut through the foam of the waves. The sound of the engines echoed violently over the dark waters, spreading panic among the Iranian fighters. Revolutionary Guard militiamen opened fire desperately with portable anti-aircraft weapons, while suicide drones were launched against the American aircraft. By 4 a.m., the sky had transformed into a hell of luminous trails, explosions, and tracer projectiles. The A-10 pilots performed extreme maneuvers over the water, trying to escape missiles and kamikaze drones. The physical exertion was brutal. In violent turns, blood rushed to the pilots' feet as their vision began to narrow due to the overwhelming G-force. At the same time, streams of magnesium flares were launched continuously, burning at absurd temperatures and creating intense flashes reflected in the black ocean. Amidst the absolute chaos, the pilots stabilized their aircraft and locked onto targets via the HUD screens. Then the legendary GU-8 Avenger cannon went into action. The metallic roar of the firing echoed across the strait like continuous thunder. Armor-piercing, depleted uranium projectiles pierced Iranian vessels with devastating violence. Speedboats exploded in flames, debris was thrown into the air, and oil slicks began to cover the surface of the water. The Strait of Hormuz slowly transformed into a gigantic, burning graveyard. At 4:10 a.m., while the air and naval battle reached insane levels of intensity, a new threat silently emerged from the depths. The Seahawk immediately switched its multimode radar to a high-resolution near-surface scan. Small metallic signals began to emerge from the choppy waves. They weren't debris. They were Iranian Maritime-class smart mines, sophisticated devices anchored to the seabed awaiting activation by acoustic or magnetic signatures. The pilot's voice echoed through the secure network in an urgent tone, alerting the entire fleet to the minefield detected at the critical coordinates. Inside the destroyer Arleigh Burke, the atmosphere changed instantly. The combat ceased to be offensive and became a desperate fight for survival. At 4:15 a.m., the captain ordered maximum evasive maneuver. The 9,000-ton destroyer listed violently as it executed a tight turn to starboard. Metal structures groaned under the strain, and extreme pressure as sailors clung to avoid being thrown against walls and consoles. The ship narrowly escaped a series of mines capable of splitting its hull in two. The A/SQ-89 system detected multiple threats simultaneously. Beyond the minefield, semi-submersible suicide boats armed with live torpedoes were rapidly approaching. The American destroyer was trapped in a deadly trap. If it advanced to escape the suicide boats, it could hit devastating mines. If it remained stationary to conduct a defensive sweep, it would become an easy target for a new wave of Iranian suicide units speeding through the sea. At 4:20 a.m., the tension reached an almost unbearable point. The second wave of the Iranian swarm appeared on the horizon, even faster and more aggressive than the first. The screens in the combat center were saturated with audible alerts. Officers shouted coordinates, while operators desperately tried to prioritize threats. The radar showed dozens of contacts converging simultaneously towards the destroyer. The ocean seemed alive, teeming with suicidal vessels advancing like shadows at high speed. The engines of the speedboats echoed through the early morning hours, mixed with the distant sounds of explosions and alarms. The American captain knew this would be the most important decision of his career. One wrong move would mean the complete destruction of the ship and hundreds of deaths in seconds. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air felt heavy. Red lights reflected on the tense faces of the crew as sweat dripped even under the frigid air conditioning. Each sailor understood that they were facing a historic battle that could completely change the military balance of the Middle East. Meanwhile, along the Iranian coast, Revolutionary Guard units were preparing a third phase of the offensive. Camouflage trucks hidden among mountain tunnels began positioning new mobile anti-ship missile launchers. Reconnaissance drones flew above the clouds, transmitting real-time images to underground command centers. The Iranian objective was clear: to completely saturate American defenses until a single breach allowed for a devastating impact. In the sky, the P-8A Poseidon continued to orbit silently above the chaos, attempting to coordinate all units amidst increasing electronic interference. Analysts on board watched in horror as enemy signatures steadily increased along the coast. The battle was ceasing to be a localized confrontation and becoming a full-scale naval war. A-10 Thunderbolts continued to dive over the waves, firing on speedboats and drones. Each pass of the sky bores left new columns of fire in the ocean. But even with all that destruction, new boats kept appearing. It seemed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was willing to sacrifice hundreds of men to transform the Strait of Hormuz into a naval extermination camp. The smell of burnt fuel and gunpowder permeated the air. Burning wreckage floated everywhere as crews struggled to survive amidst the oil and fire-covered sea. The clock slowly ticked towards dawn, but no one believed the sunlight would bring relief. On the contrary, as day broke, new coastal missiles could acquire targets with greater precision, and new waves of drones could emerge from the Iranian mountains. Inside the destroyer, sailors frantically recharged defensive systems, while the hull vibrated under the impact of nearby explosions. The commander watched the tactical data unfolding before his eyes, and understood that this was not just a battle for control of the strait. It was a brutal demonstration of how modern warfare had transformed into hybrid confrontations, involving drones, swarms, electronic warfare, smart mines, suicide attacks, and precision missiles operating simultaneously in all dimensions of combat. The Strait of Hormuz had become the epicenter of an unprecedented military storm. And as the horizon slowly began to clear with the first signs of dawn, the second Iranian wave accelerated even further toward the American fleet, determined to break through the defenses at all costs.